The New Mexico sun hung like a relentless furnace over Samuel Hargrave's modest ranch, baking the cracked earth and casting long shadows across the sagebrush. At 52, Samuel had seen enough of the frontier to know when trouble was brewing, and this morning, the air carried a stillness that set his nerves on edge. His weathered boots crunched against the dry ground as he stepped out of his cabin, his calloused hand shielding his eyes from the glare. The usual chorus of meadowlarks and rustling cottonwoods was absent, replaced by a quiet so deep it felt like the desert was holding its breath. Samuel, a man who'd learned to trust his instincts over decades of hard living, felt the weight of something unseen pressing down on him. Little did he know that a single act of kindness would soon thrust him into the heart of a standoff that would test his courage and reshape the future of the land he called home. Samuel was checking the fence along Willow Creek, his graying hair damp with sweat under his wide-brimmed hat, when he spotted a small figure huddled beneath a jagged outcrop of red rock. It was a young Navajo boy, no older than 9, his thin frame barely concealed by a tattered shirt that hung loosely over his protruding ribs. His dark eyes, wide and hollow, darted nervously, scanning the ground as his small hands clawed at the dirt, likely searching for anything edible, roots, grubs, or scraps. Samuel's chest tightened at the sight. The boy's gaunt face told a story of hunger that no child should know, and the angry welts crisscrossing his exposed arms suggested something far worse than starvation. Someone had hurt this boy, and the thought stirred a quiet anger in Samuel's gut. He approached slowly, his hands open and empty to show he meant no harm. The boy froze, his body coiled like a spring, ready to flee despite his obvious weakness. Hunger had sapped his strength, and his legs trembled as if they might give out. Samuel stopped a few feet away, his voice low and steady. "Easy now, son. I ain't here to hurt you." He reached into his satchel and pulled out the cornbread he'd packed for his midday meal, its edges crumbling from the heat. Placing it on a flat stone between them, he stepped back, giving the boy space to decide. The child's eyes flicked between Samuel and the bread, suspicion warring with desperation. For a moment, neither moved, the silence stretching taut as a bowstring. Then, with a sudden lunge, the boy snatched the bread and tore into it, devouring it in frantic bites. Crumbs fell to the ground as tears carved clean streaks through the dirt on his cheeks. Samuel watched, his throat tight, as the boy's hunger laid bare a vulnerability that cut deeper than any blade. This wasn't just a child in need. This was a soul pushed to the edge of survival. Samuel gestured toward his cabin, a weathered structure of pine and adobe nestled among the cottonwoods. He pointed to his mouth and stomach, trying to convey the promise of more food. The boy hesitated, his instinct screaming to run, but his empty belly won out. As they walked, Samuel noticed the boy's limp, favoring his right leg, and the welts on his arms raw, red, and too precise to be accidental. They looked like the marks of a lash, and the realization made Samuel's hands clench into fists. Whoever had done this would answer for it, if not to Samuel, then to some higher justice. Inside the cabin, Samuel set to work heating a pot of pinto beans and slicing more cornbread. The boy perched near the door, his body angled for a quick escape, his eyes tracking Samuel's every move. When Samuel slid a tin plate across the table, piled with steaming beans and a thick slab of bread, the boy's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped it. Samuel sat across the room, giving him space, and watched as the child ate with a ferocity that spoke of days, maybe weeks, without a proper meal. The sight stirred something deep in Samuel, a mix of pity and resolve. He didn't know this boy's story, but he knew no child deserved to suffer like this. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Samuel prepared a pallet of blankets near the hearth. The boy, exhausted from his meal and the weight of his ordeal, curled up without a word, his breathing evening out as sleep claimed him. Samuel sat by the fire, his mind turning over the day's events. He thought he was simply doing what any decent man would, offering food and shelter to a starving child. What he didn't know was that 30 miles away, a Navajo war party was already tracking the boy's trail, their moccasins silent against the desert floor. This wasn't just any lost child. This was the grandson of Chief Iron Horse, a leader whose name carried the weight of legend among his people. By morning, Samuel's quiet ranch would become the epicenter of a confrontation that could ignite the frontier. Samuel woke before dawn to the sound of his horses snorting in the corral, their unease cutting through the stillness. Years of living on the edge of civilization had taught him to trust his animal's instincts, and the hairs on his neck stood on end. The first light of dawn crept through the cabin's single window, casting long shadows across the floor where the boy still slept, his small frame wrapped in a blanket. Samuel grabbed his Winchester rifle, its familiar weight a cold comfort, and moved to the window. What he saw stopped his heart. Outside, 100 Navajo warriors sat on horseback, forming a silent crescent around his property. Their faces were painted with streaks of ochre and black, their eyes fixed on his cabin with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. They weren't charging or shouting war cries, they were simply waiting, their stillness more menacing than any attack. Samuel's mind raced as he tried to count them 60, 80, perhaps more. Each was armed with bows, rifles, and knives, their war paint fresh and their horses steady. This wasn't a raiding party, this was a nation, and they were here for the boy. The child stirred, perhaps sensing the shift in the air. His eyes snapped open, and when he saw Samuel's tense expression, he scrambled to the window. The moment he glimpsed the warriors, his face drained of color, and he began to tremble, his small hands clutching the windowsill. Samuel realized with a sinking feeling that this boy wasn't just a runaway. He was someone important enough to bring an entire army to his doorstep. The boy's rapid breathing and wide eyes confirmed I was terrified, not just of the warriors, but of what their presence meant. Samuel checked his ammunition, 15 rounds for the rifle, 8 in his Colt revolver. Against 100 Navajo warriors, it was like spitting into a wildfire. Running wasn't an option either. The warriors had encircled the ranch, their horses positioned to cut off any escape. Samuel's heart pounded as he weighed his options, each worse than the last. Handing over the boy might end this peacefully, but those welts on his arms flashed in Samuel's mind, a stark reminder of the cruelty he'd suffered. Whatever had brought this child here, Samuel wasn't about to send him back to more pain without a fight. As the sun climbed higher, a single rider broke from the group, approaching the cabin with deliberate slowness. He was older, his hair streaked with gray, his face lined with the scars of battles fought and won. Feathers adorned his head, and his posture radiated authority. This was no ordinary warrior, this was a chief, and his presence demanded respect. Samuel gripped his rifle tighter, his palms slick with sweat, as the man stopped his horse 30 feet from the porch. In the chief's hand was a coiled whip, its leather stained dark with what looked like dried blood, the same kind of whip that had left marks on the boy's arms. The boy saw it too and let out a choked sob, pressing himself against Samuel's side as if seeking protection from a storm only he could see. Samuel's stomach churned. This wasn't just about a lost child. He was sheltering someone who'd fled from this chief's punishment, someone whose absence had mobilized an entire tribe. The realization hit Samuel like a blow. He was standing between a terrified child and a nation ready to reclaim him, whip and all. The chief dismounted, his movements deliberate, and called out in accented but clear English, "White man, you hold what belongs to the Navajo. Return the boy, and your life will be spared." His voice was calm, each word measured, but it carried the weight of a man who expected obedience. Samuel stepped onto the porch, keeping his rifle lowered but ready. The boy remained inside, his quiet whimpers audible through the open door. "He came to me starving and beaten," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "I gave him food and a place to rest. That's all." The chief's eyes narrowed, studying Samuel as if searching for a lie. "You speak truth, rancher. The boy is my grandson, young Hawk. He fled his punishment 3 days ago. He took sacred seeds from our winter stores, a crime against our people." Samuel felt his jaw tighten. Sacred seeds or not, no child deserved to be whipped until his skin broke. Punishment for taking food when he's starving. That's not justice. That's cruelty. The words hung in the air, bold and dangerous. Around the semicircle of warriors, Samuel saw hands tighten on weapons, horses shifting as their riders bristled at the accusation. He'd just challenged a Navajo chief in front of his army. A move that could end with arrows flying or his cabin burned to ash. But instead of signaling an attack, the chief raised a hand, silencing his warriors. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on Samuel's. "You know nothing of Navajo ways," the chief said, his voice low but sharp. "Young Hawk is no ordinary child. He is marked by the spirits as our future leader. When he stole the sacred seeds, he broke laws older than your people's memory of this land." Samuel's mind reeled as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't about hunger or theft. It was about a boy destined to lead. A boy who'd violated a sacred trust. The whipping wasn't mere cruelty, it was a ritual. A consequence rooted in traditions Samuel couldn't fully grasp. But understanding didn't erase the image of young Hawk's trembling frame, or the welts that scarred his skin. The boy was still a child, and Samuel's heart refused to let him go back to more pain. "I hear you, Chief," Samuel said, choosing his words carefully. "But that boy's more scared than any child ought to be. If he's to be your leader, maybe there's a way to teach him without breaking him." The chief's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes flickered with something surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect. "You speak boldly for a man with death at his door. What would you have me do? Ignore our laws because the thief is young?" Samuel took a deep breath, aware that every warrior was watching, waiting for a reason to act. "I'm not saying ignore your laws. I'm saying maybe there's a way to teach him why those laws matter, not just make him fear breaking them." Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Young Hawk stepped onto the porch, his small frame trembling, but his head held high. He spoke in rapid Navajo, his voice shaking but clear. The chief's face shifted surprise, then a hint of pride. He translated for Samuel. "He says he is ready to face his punishment, but he thanks you for your kindness. He says you've shown him that courage can come from unexpected places." Samuel's throat tightened. This 9-year-old boy was offering to sacrifice himself to save Samuel's life, a gesture that carried more weight than any warrior's vow. But the chief wasn't done. He turned to his warriors, his voice booming across the desert. Whatever he said caused a stir. Some nodded, others murmured in dissent. When he finished, a small group of warriors broke away, riding toward the cabin with packs slung across their horses. Samuel's hand twitched toward his rifle, but the chief raised a hand. "They bring supplies, rancher, to help you care for the boy." Samuel blinked, confused. "Care for him? I thought you were taking him back." The chief's lips curved into a faint smile. "Young Hawk's punishment will come, but first, he will learn from you. For 1 month, he stays here, learning your ways of survival and kindness. Then he returns to face Navajo justice, stronger for it." Samuel felt relief flood through him, but the chief's next words chilled him. "But hear this, rancher. If any harm comes to him, 100 warriors will return, and we will not come to talk." As the Navajo riders retreated, leaving only dust in their wake, Samuel stood on his porch, the weight of the morning settling on his shoulders. Young Hawk remained in the doorway, watching his grandfather's figure disappear into the horizon. The boy's eyes held a mix of relief and fear. Had a month of reprieve, but his fate still loomed. Samuel turned to the boy, his voice soft. "Well, young Hawk, looks like we're stuck together for a spell." The boy nodded, his small frame still tense but resolute. Samuel spent the morning tending to the boy's wounds, using the salves and bandages the warriors had left. Young Hawk endured the pain silently, his knuckles white as he gripped the table's edge. When Samuel handed him a clean shirt, far too big, but free of tears, boy's eyes softened with gratitude. Over the next week, they fell into a rhythm. Samuel worked the ranch, mending fences and tending cattle, while young Hawk followed, absorbing every detail of the white man's ways. The boy was quick, picking up English phrases with ease and teaching Samuel Navajo tricks for reading the land, how to spot a storm hours before it broke, how to track a deer by the faintest scuff in the dirt. But beneath his curiosity, young Hawk carried a quiet dread, his eyes often drifting to the mountains where his people waited. One evening, as they sat by the fire, young Hawk spoke, his English halting but clear. "Grandfather says I broke sacred law. When I go back, elders decide if I live or die." His voice trembled, and Samuel's heart ached for the boy carrying such a burden. "You made a mistake, young Hawk," Samuel said, staring into the flames. "But you were hungry. That doesn't make you a failure. It makes you human." The boy shook his head. "Navajo law says taking sacred seeds puts my needs above the tribe's. That is not the way of a leader." Samuel searched for words to ease the boy's fear, but before he could speak, a new sound broke the night thunder of hooves, too many to count. Samuel grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, his heart sinking as he saw torches flickering in the distance. These weren't Navajo warriors. These were white men, at least 25 strong, their voices rough with anger as they surrounded the ranch. "Hargrove," a voice bellowed, "we know you're hiding that Navajo kid. Send him out, or we'll burn this place to the ground." Samuel recognized the voice. Ezekiel Crane, a local cattle baron with a grudge against the Navajo and a hunger for power. Crane had been stirring trouble for months, itching for a reason to break the fragile peace treaty. Now, he'd found his excuse in young Hawk. Samuel checked his ammunition, his mind racing. 18 bullets against 25 armed men was a death sentence. But letting Crane take the boy would mean a war that would consume every settlement in the territory. Young Hawk pressed against Samuel's side, his voice a desperate whisper. "I go to them. Stop fighting because of me." "No, son," Samuel said, his voice firm. "You're staying right here." But as the torches closed in, Samuel knew they were trapped. Crane's men were spreading out, their shadows dancing in the firelight. This wasn't just a raid, it was a reckoning. And as Samuel braced for the fight of his life, he heard another sound, more horses, approaching fast from the opposite direction. Either help was coming, or Chief Iron Horse had returned early. One thing was certain, Samuel's ranch was about to become a battlefield, and the boy at his side was the spark that could set the frontier ablaze. As the torches of Ezekiel Crane's men cast flickering shadows across Samuel Hargrove's ranch, the thunder of approaching hooves grew louder, slicing through the tense night air. Samuel stood on his porch, Winchester in hand, young Hawk pressed against his side, the boy's small frame trembling but resolute. The ranch, once a quiet haven under the New Mexico stars, was now a powder keg. Surrounded by Crane's 25 vigilantes, their voices thick with malice, Samuel's heart pounded as he weighed his impossible choices. Fight a hopeless battle to protect the Navajo boy, or surrender him to a man whose hatred could spark a war across the territory. But the new sound horses galloping from the west shifted the stakes. Was it Chief Iron Horse returning early for his grandson, or some other force drawn to the chaos? Whatever it was, Samuel knew the next few minutes would decide whether his ranch became a battlefield or a beacon of hope. Crane's voice cut through the darkness, sharp and venomous. "Hargrove, you've got 10 seconds to send out that Navajo brat, or we'll drag him out ourselves." His men, a mix of ranch hands and drifters, spread out in a loose semicircle, their rifles glinting in the torchlight. Samuel recognized some of the men who'd drunk too much in town, their fears stoked by Crane's tales of Navajo raids that hadn't happened in years. The cattle baron had been itching to break the 1864 peace treaty, and young Hawk was his perfect excuse. Samuel tightened his grip on his rifle, counting his ammunition again. 15 rounds in the Winchester, 8 in his Colt. Against 25 men, it was suicide, but handing over young Hawk wasn't an option. The boy's welts, still raw from the whip, burned in Samuel's memory. He'd seen enough of Crane's cruelty to know the boy wouldn't survive the night in his hands. Young Hawk tugged at Samuel's sleeve, his voice a desperate whisper. "I go to them, Mr. Hargrove. Stop this fight." "No, son," Samuel said, his voice low but firm. "You're staying right here." He glanced toward the approaching hooves, his pulse quickening. Friend or foe, the new rivals would tip the balance, and Samuel prayed they'd bring reason instead of more bloodshed. The torches wavered as Crane's men turned, their bravado faltering at the sound of the oncoming riders. Samuel peered into the darkness, his eyes straining to make out shapes beyond the firelight. Then, from the west, a dozen horsemen emerged, their silhouettes sharp against the starry sky. At their head rode Sheriff Amos Caldwell, a grizzled lawman from Las Cruces, his badge glinting as he reined in his horse. Behind him were deputized townsfolk, farmers, blacksmiths, and merchants Samuel knew as honest men who'd stood against Crane's bullying before. Relief flooded Samuel, but it was short-lived. Caldwell's rival meant law, but it also meant a confrontation that could still go wrong. "Crane," Caldwell's voice boomed, steady as iron. "By what authority are you threatening a man on his own land?" The sheriff's hand rested on his revolver, his deputies fanning out to flank Crane's men. The vigilantes shifted uneasily, their torches dipping as their confidence waned. Crane wheeled his horse, his face red with fury. "This man's harboring a Navajo fugitive, Sheriff. That boy's people have been raiding our cattle, and Hargreaves protecting him. He's a traitor to his own kind." Samuel's jaw clenched. Crane's lies were as bold as they were dangerous. The Navajo hadn't raided since the treaty, a fact Caldwell knew well. But Crane's men, fueled by fear and whiskey, didn't care about facts. They wanted blood, and young Hawk was their target. Caldwell dismounted, his boots kicking up dust as he faced Crane. "I've got a telegram from the territorial governor, Ezekiel. That boy's under official protection while the treaty holds. You're the one breaking the law here, and I'll haul you to Santa Fe in chains if you don't stand down." Crane's eyes narrowed, his hand twitching toward his gun. "You think you can scare me with a badge, Caldwell? That kid's a spy, gathering secrets for his people. We're sending a message tonight." Young Hawk's grip on Samuel's sleeve tightened, his eyes wide with fear. Samuel glanced toward the darkness beyond the torchlight, his instinct screaming that they weren't alone. Then he saw it movement in the shadows, silent and deliberate. Dozens of Navajo warriors emerged, their horses stepping into the light like ghosts materializing from the desert. At their head was Chief Iron Horse, his scarred face calm but unyielding, his warriors' bows and rifles ready but not raised. The air grew thick with tension as three armed groups, Crane's vigilantes, Caldwell's deputies, and Iron Horse's warriors formed a deadly triangle around Samuel's ranch. Samuel's heart sank. One wrong move could turn this standoff into a massacre. Young Hawk's breathing quickened, his small hand slipping into Samuel's, seeking reassurance. The boy's courage, despite his fear, struck Samuel like a hammer. This child, marked by his people as a future leader, was caught in a storm of adult hatreds he couldn't fully understand. Iron Horse dismounted, his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes sweeping over the scene with a mix of disdain and amusement. "White men argue over one small boy," he said, his voice carrying across the night. "Perhaps we should speak like men of reason before blood spills and no one wins." Crane's face flushed, his hand inching toward his revolver. "Don't lecture me, Chief. Your people have been stealing from us for years. That boy's proof of it." Caldwell stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Enough, Crane. One more word, and I'll arrest you for inciting violence against a treaty-protected individual. Drop your weapon now." The vigilantes hesitated, their torches wavering as they glanced between Crane's fury and Caldwell's calm authority. Samuel could see the cracks forming. Crane's men were no soldiers, just angry townsfolk caught up in his vendetta. But the Navajo warriors were another matter. Their silence was more threatening than any shout, their hands steady on their weapons, waiting for their chief's command. Iron Horse's gaze settled on Crane, his voice low but cutting. "You accuse my grandson of theft, yet your people have taken our land for generations. If you wish to settle this, face me alone, with weapons of your choosing." The challenge hung in the air, a test of Crane's courage. Samuel knew the cattle baron would never accept Crane was a bully, not a warrior. The vigilantes shifted, their bravado crumbling under the weight of Iron Horse's words and Caldwell's badge. But before Crane could respond, young Hawk stepped onto the porch, his small voice cutting through the tension like a bell. "I will speak for myself," the boy said, his English clear and steady despite his trembling hands. "I am young Hawk, grandson of Chief Iron Horse, future leader of the Navajo. I broke our sacred law by taking seeds, and I accept my punishment. But I have learned from Mr. Hargrove that kindness can come from enemies, and from my people that mercy can come from strength. Maybe we all have something to learn." The boy's words stunned the crowd into silence. Samuel felt a surge of pride as young Hawk stood tall, addressing warriors, lawmen, and vigilantes with the composure of a leader far beyond his 9 years. The Navajo warriors exchanged glances, some nodding in approval, others clearly surprised by the boy's courage. Caldwell's deputies lowered their weapons slightly, respect flickering in their eyes. Even Crane's men seemed uncertain, their torches dipping as the boy's words sank in. But Crane, desperate to save face, made a fatal mistake. "You think a Navajo brat can lecture us?" he snarled, raising his rifle. The sound of dozens of Navajo bows being drawn cut through the night, their arrows trained on Crane. Samuel's hand moved to his Colt, ready to protect young Hawk at any cost. Caldwell moved faster, his revolver snapping up to point at Crane's head. "Drop it, Ezekiel, or you're a dead man," the sheriff growled. "You're under arrest for violating territorial law and threatening a protected individual." Crane's face went pale as his men backed away, their torches trembling. They weren't ready to die for his vendetta, especially not against a sheriff and a Navajo war party. Iron Horse raised a hand, and the sound of drawn bows ceased. The warriors holding their fire, but not relaxing their stance. The chief's eyes met Samuel's, a flicker of respect passing between them. "Sheriff Caldwell honors his word," Iron Horse said. "This is why peace is possible. Rancher, will you speak for young Hawk when he faces our elders?" Samuel felt the weight of the moment settle on him. This wasn't just about one boy, it was about bridging a divide between two peoples who'd fought for centuries. "It'd be my honor, Chief," he said, his voice steady. "Young Hawk's shown more courage than most men I've known. He deserves a chance to prove himself." Young Hawk stepped forward, his small frame radiating a quiet strength. "I will return to my people, not ashamed of my mistake, but proud of what I've learned. Mr. Hargrove taught me that kindness is strength, and protecting others is a leader's duty." Iron Horse placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder, pride evident in his weathered face. "You speak with wisdom, young Hawk. The elders will hear you, and they will hear the rancher's words." Caldwell's deputies moved in, disarming Crane and binding his wrists. The vigilantes dispersed into the night, their torches fading as they fled the consequences of their choices. The Navajo warriors remained, their presence a silent reminder of the stakes. Samuel knelt beside young Hawk, his throat tight. "You ready to go home, son?" The boy nodded, then surprised Samuel by hugging him tightly. "You are my white brother, Mr. Hargrove. When I am chief, you will always have a place with us." Iron Horse handed Samuel a small pouch, its contents heavy with gold and turquoise. "For your care of my grandson," the chief said. "And for your courage." Samuel opened it, stunned by the wealth inside. But the true reward was the respect in Iron Horse's Isa bridge built between two worlds. As the Navajo prepared to leave, young Hawk mounted behind his grandfather, looking back at Samuel with a mix of gratitude and resolve. The boy was no longer the terrified child Samuel had found. He was a leader in the making, carrying lessons that could change his people's future. But the story wasn't over. As the dust settled and the ranch grew quiet, Samuel felt a new unease. Crane's arrest wouldn't end his influencemen like him had allies, and grudges didn't die easily in the frontier. Young Hawk's trial before the Navajo elders loomed, and Samuel's role as his advocate would thrust him deeper into a world he barely understood. The ranch, now a symbol of fragile peace, would face new threats before the month was out. As the hoofbeats of Chief Iron Horse's war party faded into the New Mexico night, Samuel Hargrove stood on his porch, the weight of young Hawk's small hand still lingering in his own. The ranch, briefly a battleground for vigilantes, lawmen, and Navajo warriors, had fallen silent. But Samuel knew the peace was fragile. Ezekiel Crane's arrest had averted a massacre, but men like him didn't vanish quietly. The cattle baron's allies still roamed the territory, and young Hawk's trial before the Navajo elders was only weeks away. Samuel's promise to speak for the boy would draw him into a world of sacred laws and ancient traditions, where one misstep could unravel everything he'd fought for. As the stars burned bright above Willow Creek, Samuel felt the weight of a new responsibility just to protect a child, but to prove that trust could bridge even the deepest divides. The next morning, Samuel woke to find young Hawk already up, sitting by the hearth, his small hands carefully sharpening a stick with a knife the Navajo warriors had left. The boy's focus was intense, but his eyes carried the same worry Samuel had seen the night before. "Mr. Hargrove," young Hawk said, his English stronger now, "when I face the elders, will you tell them I am not bad?" Samuel knelt beside him, his voice steady. "I'll tell them you're brave, son. braver than most men. You made a mistake, but you've learned from it. That's what matters." Young Hawk nodded, but his gaze drifted to the mountains where his people waited. Samuel knew the boy was torn proud to return as a future leader, but terrified of the judgment that could end his life. The Navajos' sacred laws were unforgiving, and stealing sacred seeds was no small crime. Samuel's testimony would carry weight, but it would also test his ability to navigate a culture he barely understood. Over the next 2 weeks, Samuel and young Hawk settled into a deeper routine. The boy helped with ranch chores, learning to mend fences and drive cattle with a quickness that impressed Samuel. In return, Samuel taught him English phrases and frontier survival skills: how to read a trail, how to find water in the desert. Young Hawk shared Navajo knowledge, showing Samuel how to weave a basket from willow branches and predict rain by the flight of birds. Their bond grew, not as guardian and ward, but as teacher and student, each learning from the other. But the peace was short-lived. One evening, as Samuel and young Hawk sat by the fire, the sound of hooves broke the quiet. Samuel grabbed his rifle, his heart sinking as he peered through the window. 5 riders approached, their faces hidden in the dusk, but their intent clear from the rifles slung across their saddles. These weren't Navajo warriors or Sheriff Caldwell's deputies, they were Crane's men, come to finish what their leader started. "Hargrove," a voice shouted, "we know you've got that Navajo kid. Crane's in jail because of you, and we ain't letting that stand." Samuel recognized the speaker, Jedediah Holt, Crane's foreman, a man known for his loyalty and his quick trigger finger. The other 4 were rough types, likely hired guns, who'd followed Crane's money. Samuel's ammunition was low: 10 rounds in the rifle, 6 in the Colt. Against 5 armed men, he had a chance, but not if they rushed the cabin. Young Hawk's eyes widened, but he stood firm, clutching the sharpened stick like a weapon. "I fight with you," he whispered. "No, son," Samuel said, pushing him toward the back of the cabin. "Hide in the root cellar. Now." The boy hesitated, then obeyed, slipping through the trapdoor as Holt's men dismounted and spread out. Samuel barred the door and took position by the window, his rifle ready. "Holt, you're on my land," he called. "Sheriff Caldwell's got Crane, and he'll have you too if you don't leave." Holt laughed, a harsh sound that carried no humor. "Caldwell's in Las Cruces, Hargrove. Ain't no one coming to save you. Send out the boy, or we burn this place down." Samuel's mind raced. The root cellar would keep young Hawk safe for now, but if Holt set the cabin alight, they'd both be trapped. He needed time, and he needed help. As Holt's men advanced, their torches casting long shadows, Samuel fired a warning shot into the dirt, the crack echoing across the ranch. The men froze, but Holt's voice grew colder. "You're a dead man, Hargrove." Before Samuel could respond, a new sound cut through the night glow, rhythmic beat of drums, Navajo drums, coming from the east. Samuel's heart leapt as he realized Iron Horse's warriors had been watching, likely trailing young Hawk to ensure his safety. The drums grew louder, and shadows moved in the darkness. Dozens of Navajo riders, their silhouettes stark against the horizon. Holt's men turned, their bravado crumbling as the warriors approached. Iron Horse rode at the front, his face unreadable but his presence commanding. "White men," he called, his voice carrying over the drums. "You threaten my grandson on land where he is guest. Leave now, or you will not leave at all." Holt's men hesitated, their torches wavering. Samuel saw his chance. "Holt, you're outnumbered. Walk away, or you'll answer to the sheriff and the Navajo." Holt cursed, but the sight of 30 Navajo warriors, their bows drawn, was too much. He signaled his men, and they mounted their horses, retreating into the night. Samuel exhaled, his hands shaking as he lowered his rifle. Iron Horse dismounted, his eyes meeting Samuel's with a nod of respect. "You protect my grandson, rancher. The Navajo do not forget." Young Hawk emerged from the cellar, his face pale but his eyes bright with relief. He ran to his grandfather, who knelt and spoke softly in Navajo. The boy nodded, then turned to Samuel. "You kept me safe again, Mr. Hargrove. I will not forget." The warriors left as silently as they'd come, their drums fading into the night. Samuel knew this wasn't the end. Crane's allies would try again, and young Hawk's trial loomed closer. But for now, the ranch was safe, and the bond between Samuel and the boy had grown stronger. A week later, the month ended, and Iron Horse returned with a small group of warriors to escort young Hawk to the Navajo elders. Samuel prepared to join them, his heart heavy but resolute. The trial would take place in a sacred canyon 20 miles north, a place where Navajo law held sway. Samuel packed his horse, carrying the pouch of gold and turquoise as a reminder of the trust he'd earned. The journey was quiet, young Hawk riding beside his grandfather, Samuel trailing behind. The canyon was a place of stark beauty, its red walls rising to meet a sky streaked with clouds. The elders, 7 men and women with faces etched by time, sat in a circle round a fire. Young Hawk stood before them, his small frame straight despite the fear in his eyes. Iron Horse spoke first, recounting the boy's crime-stealing sacred seeds and his month with Samuel, learning the ways of the white man. Samuel stepped forward when called, his voice steady as he addressed the elders. Young Hawk made a mistake, but he was hungry and scared. He's learned more in a month than most do in a lifetime about courage, kindness, and the weight of leadership. He's no thief. He's a boy who'll be a great chief if you give him the chance. The elders listened, their faces unreadable. Young Hawk spoke next, his voice clear in Navajo, then in English for Samuel's benefit. I broke our law, and I am sorry. But Mr. Hargrove showed me that strength comes from protecting others, not just following rules. I want to lead our people with that strength. The elders conferred, their voices low. Samuel's heart pounded as he waited, knowing young Hawk's life hung in the balance. Finally, the eldest woman spoke, her words translated by Iron Horse. Young Hawk has shown remorse and wisdom. The rancher's testimony proves his heart is true. He will live, and he will train as our future chief. Relief washed over Samuel, mirrored in young Hawk's tearful smile. Iron Horse placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. You have honored us, rancher. Your land is a place of peace now, where Navajo and white men may meet without fear. Months later, Samuel's ranch became a neutral trading ground, where Navajo weavers and white merchants bartered under his watchful eye. Young Hawk, now training under his grandfather, visited often, his English fluent and his spirit unbroken. The boy who'd once stolen in desperation was now a symbol of hope, carrying lessons of mercy and trust into his future. Samuel never saw Ezekiel Crane again. Word came that he'd been convicted of inciting violence and sent to a territorial prison. Holt and his men faded into obscurity, their threats silenced by the law and the Navajo's strength. On quiet nights, when the wind carried the sound of Navajo chants across the valley, Samuel would think of young Hawk, the boy who'd taught him that courage meant standing for what was right, even when it cost everything.